The setting sun cast a long, weary shadow across the parched fields of the Lazy J Ranch. Inside the humble ranch house, the air was thick with the scent of sage and impending farewell. Jedediah Jed Carter, a man whose hands had shaped the very earth of this land, lay on his deathbed, his body weakened by a fever that no doctor could cure. His wife, Elara, knelt beside him, her hand clasped firmly in his. Her fingers traced the calloused lines that told the story of his life, a life of tireless work, honest sweat, and a deep, abiding love for their land. Jed's eyes, once as clear as a desert sky, were now clouded with pain and a terrible worry. He struggled to speak, his voice a raspy whisper. "Elara, the land, promise me you'll protect it." He was talking about Silas Blackwood, a ruthless land baron who had been trying to gobble up every acre in the valley. Blackwood had been pressuring Jed for years, and now, with Jed's time running out, the vultures were circling. Elara's own voice trembled. She was a woman of quiet strength, but the weight of his request felt immense. She had always been the heart of the home, not the shield of the ranch. Yet looking into Jed's fading eyes, she saw not just a husband asking for a favor, but a man entrusting her with his very soul. "I promise, Jed," she said, her voice finding its steel. "I will guard our land. Forever." With that promise, a final peaceful sigh escaped Jed's lips, and his grip on Elara's hand went slack. A new chapter of her life began, one filled with grief, defiance, and a promise made to a dying man. Enjoying the story? Be sure to subscribe to the channel to not miss a single moment of Elara's journey and to see more stories just like this one. The morning after Jed's funeral, a pall of silence hung over the Lazy J, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustling wind. The quiet didn't last. A plume of dust on the horizon signaled an unwelcome visit. It was Silas Blackwood's foreman, a broad-shouldered man with a sneering smile and cold eyes named Butch. He dismounted his horse with an air of ownership, flanked by two other rough-looking men. Butch swaggered to the porch, his spurs clinking on the wooden steps. "Morning, Mrs. Carter," he said, the politeness thin and laced with malice. "Mr. Blackwood sends his condolences. He also wanted me to let you know his offer for this place still stands, a generous one, considering your, current situation." Elara stepped outside, pulling her worn shawl tighter. She felt a surge of fear, but her promise to Jed burned in her chest. "The Lazy J is not for sale," she stated simply, her voice clear despite the tremor in her heart. Butch's sneer widened. "Look, lady, you're a widow. No man to run this place. You'll be broke in 6 months. Blackwood's offer is your best bet, your only bet." He gestured dismissively toward the fields. "This ain't a woman's world. You're just delaying the inevitable." Elara met his gaze head-on. "Then you can tell Mr. Blackwood that the inevitable will have to wait," she replied, her words a defiant shield. The men laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound, but they left, their arrogance a stark reminder of the battle ahead. Elara watched them go, the dust cloud they left behind a symbol of the storm gathering on her horizon. She was alone, but not defeated. Elara knew she couldn't face Blackwood's threats alone. The Lazy J was more than just a house and a few acres. It was a sprawling, demanding enterprise. She needed help, and she needed it quickly. She rode into the dusty town of Redemption, a place where folks knew to keep their heads down when it came to Blackwood. Her first stop was the sheriff's office, a small, worn building smelling of old wood and stale coffee. Sheriff Thompson, a man whose grey mustache drooped with the weight of years, listened to her with a weary expression. "I can't do much, Elara," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Silas Blackwood is a powerful man. He hasn't broken any laws yet. He's just making life difficult." His words offered no comfort, only the cold truth of a town under a tyrant's thumb. Feeling the sting of disappointment, Elara left, her hope fading. As she walked her horse back down the main street, a young man stepped out of the general store. It was Caleb, one of the ranch hands who had worked for Jed. He was young, no more than 20, but his eyes held a steely resolve. "Mrs. Carter," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I heard what Butch said. I know Jed wouldn't want you to lose this place. I'm not much, but I know this land. I know how to fix fences, how to tend the cattle." He looked at her, his expression earnest. "If you'll have me, I'll stand with you. It's what Jed would have wanted." Elara looked at the young man, a flicker of light in her darkness. He wasn't the town sheriff or a powerful ally, but he was loyal. And in this unforgiving landscape, loyalty was a currency more valuable than gold. She nodded, a grateful tear welling in her eye. "Thank you, Caleb," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." The first few weeks were a relentless assault of small, deliberate acts of sabotage. Elara and Caleb found the main fence line cut in 3 separate places, forcing them to spend a full day riding the perimeter, making hurried repairs. A few days later, a critical watering hole for the cattle was found fouled with oil, forcing them to drive the herd miles out of their usual path to another, clean source. It was clear that Blackwood's strategy was not a single grand attack, but a slow, suffocating chokehold designed to wear her down. Caleb, despite his youth, proved to be an invaluable partner. He was tireless and resourceful, teaching Elara how to patch the fences with twine and scrap wood, and how to track the cattle through the scrub brush. Elara, in turn, discovered a deep well of resilience she never knew she possessed. She had always managed the accounts and the household, but now she was out in the sun, her hands blistering from handling rough rope and her clothes perpetually dusty. She learned to mend saddles and inspect hoofs, her mind constantly calculating their next move. The physical labor was exhausting, but it was a welcome distraction from her grief. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars come out, Caleb said, "Blackwood's just trying to break your spirit, Mrs. Carter." Elara looked out over the darkened fields of the Lazy J. The ranch was a part of her now, a living, breathing thing that demanded her care and her fight. "Then he'll have to try harder," she replied, a faint, determined smile on her face. The promise she made to Jed no longer felt like a burden, but a shield. This is a long story, but it's just one of many. If you're hooked, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We have a lot more epic tales waiting to be told, and you don't want to miss a single one. Blackwood's intimidation wasn't limited to the Lazy J. His influence spread through the town of Redemption like a plague of locusts. He owned the general store, the saloon, and the bank, and his control was absolute. As Elara's stubborn resistance became the talk of the town, people started to look at her differently. At first, it was pity. Then it turned to a quiet scorn. They saw her as a fool, a woman foolishly fighting a battle she couldn't possibly win, and her actions threatened to bring Blackwood's wrath down on all of them. When Elara rode into town to buy supplies, the general store owner, a man she had known for years, was brisk and distant. He gave her short shrift, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting Blackwood's men to walk in at any moment. At the bank, the clerk denied her a small loan to buy feed for the winter, citing unstable collateral. Erdun. Word of Blackwood's unspoken orders had reached everywhere. The town was closing ranks against her, and the isolation was a different kind of pain than the loneliness of the ranch. One afternoon, as she was leaving town, an old woman she used to share tea with simply looked away, pretending not to see her. The rejection stung more than any cut fence. Elara felt a deep ache in her chest, a profound sense of abandonment. But as she rode back to the Lazy J, she held her head high. She realized that their fear was Blackwood's greatest weapon. If she gave in to it, she would not only lose her ranch, but she would also betray Jed's memory and validate their cowardice. She was alone, but she wasn't defeated. She was fighting for more than just land. She was fighting for a principle, a belief that a person could stand against a bully and win. Just when Elara felt the immense weight of the world crushing her shoulders, a figure on horseback appeared on the dusty road leading to the Lazy J. It was Silas, a grizzled prospector and a lifelong friend of Jed's. His face, etched with 1,000 sun-baked wrinkles, was as craggy as the mountains he scoured for gold. He'd been gone for years, chasing a rumor of a rich vein up north, and had only just heard of Jed's passing upon his return to town. Silas dismounted with a weary groan, his joints protesting, and offered Elara a rare, genuine smile. "Heard you were giving old Blackwood a run for his money," he rasped, his voice as rough as sandpaper. "Jed always said you had grit." His arrival was a powerful jolt of hope. Silas wasn't a rancher, but he knew this unforgiving land in a way few others did. He had learned the art of survival in the wilderness, and his tricks were invaluable. He spent the next few days with Elara and Caleb, a silent, watchful mentor. He taught them how to lay simple but highly effective traps with rope and concealed pitfalls to catch trespassers. He also showed them how to rig a makeshift alarm system with tin cans and wire, strung through the brush around the perimeter of the ranch house. More than that, he revealed to them a network of old forgotten trails on the Lazy J that could be used to move the cattle in secret, away from Blackwood's prying eyes and men. One evening, by the flickering light of the campfire, Silas shared stories of his youth with Jed, talking about their early days of homesteading, the hardships they overcame, and the unspoken promises they made to build a life on this difficult land. It wasn't just practical help Silas offered. It was a profound connection to Jed's memory, a living reinforcement of the very foundation of Elara's promise. With Silas's wisdom and Caleb's unwavering strength, Elara felt the impossible task before her become a little less daunting. The fight was still her own, but she no longer felt entirely alone in her grief and defiance. She had allies, and they were ready to stand with her. The uneasy calm of the valley was shattered one hot afternoon by the thunder of hooves. A large group of Blackwood's men, led by the hulking figure of Butch, thundered onto the Lazy J, kicking up a colossal wall of dust that swallowed the horizon. This was no petty sabotage. This was a full-scale raid, a brazen attempt to rustle Elara's entire herd and finally break her will. Elara, Caleb, and Silas were ready. They had prepared for this, and they were not going to be caught off guard. The main herd was already gone, moved hours ago along one of the hidden trails Silas had shown them, heading toward a secluded box canyon. As the rustlers rode in, they found the main pasture empty, a shocking silence where the lowing of cattle should have been. Furious, Butch and his men began to spread out, cursing loudly as they searched for the cattle. This was exactly what Elara and her allies had planned. From a high ridge overlooking the valley, Caleb began to fire carefully aimed shots with his rifle. He wasn't aiming to kill, but to herd the rustlers' horses and disorient their formation. Silas, a master of the local terrain, was on the far side, using his knowledge to trigger a small but strategic rockslide, blocking a crucial path and forcing Butch's men to split up in confusion. Elara, on horseback, rode low and fast, guiding the remaining few cattle that hadn't been moved yet into the safety of the canyon. The rustlers were confused and scattered, their planned, overwhelming assault turning into a disorganized search. Butch, enraged and humiliated, finally realized he'd been outsmarted. As he galloped toward Elara, a vicious snarl on his face, she stood her ground, her face grim. But it wasn't her fight he was met with. As he closed in, the sheriff and a small posse of men from town, shamed by Elara's bravery and the blatant aggression of Blackwood's men, rode out from the scrub brush to meet him. They had finally found their courage, their faces set with a grim resolve. Butch and his men, defeated and outnumbered, were forced to retreat, a cloud of dust marking their ignominious defeat and the first major victory for Elara. The story is heating up, but it's not over yet. Make sure you subscribe to our channel to be the first to know what happens next. You won't regret it. The victory felt good, but it was only a temporary reprieve. Blackwood's brute force had been repelled, but his influence remained, and Elara knew he would not give up. As she and her allies surveyed the damage from the raid, Silas, the old prospector, spoke up. "You can't fight fire with fire forever, Elara. There's got to be a different way, a permanent way." And he remembered a time when Jed had talked about an old land claim, a dusty document from the early days of the territory that predated Blackwood's ownership of the surrounding properties. He said it was his ace in the hole, Silas recalled, something he was saving in case things ever got this bad. Elara's mind latched onto the idea like a lifeline, a legal solution, the very thing Blackwood was so good at manipulating. If she could find a document that legally protected the Lazy J, it would be a weapon far more powerful than any rifle. The next day, she and Caleb rode to the town hall. It was a small, neglected building filled with decades of forgotten papers, ledgers and deeds, and it smelled of old paper and dust. The town clerk, a nervous man who fidgeted constantly, was unhelpful, citing confidentiality and muttering about Blackwood's watchful eyes. "I can't just let you go through the records, Mrs. Carter. It's against regulations," he stammered, glancing over his shoulder. Undeterred, Elara and Caleb began to search on their own, spending days sifting through mountains of yellow documents and crumbling records. They worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk, their hands caked with dust and their eyes straining in the dim light. It was a frustrating, seemingly hopeless task, a scavenger hunt through the history of the valley. But they were driven by the memory of Jed and the promise she had made. They weren't just looking for a piece of paper, they were looking for a sliver of justice in a world that seemed determined to deny it to them. The breakthrough came late one evening, just as Elara was about to give up, her head swimming with the names and dates of strangers. Buried beneath a stack of old property tax records from the 1870s, Caleb found a tattered leather folder. Inside was a hand-drawn map of the valley and a land deed dating back to before the territory was officially established. The document wasn't a standard deed, it was a Homestead Act certificate, signed and authenticated by a federal surveyor years before Blackwood had bought up the neighboring lands. It clearly designated the Lazy J as Jed's property, with specific boundaries and, most importantly, with a unique clause that made it permanently exempt from being sold for back taxes, a common and ruthless tactic Blackwood used to seize land from desperate ranchers. They had found it, the ace in the hole. Elara held the document in her hands, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and pure exhilaration. The paper felt fragile, the ink faded, but its power was immense. It was the legal foundation for her claim, the very thing that made her land untouchable by Blackwood's usual means. But their work wasn't done. The document was old and fragile. It needed to be authenticated and officially filed with the county. They had to move quickly before Blackwood could hear of their discovery and find a way to discredit it or steal it. The clock was ticking, and they knew Blackwood would not take this lying down. The final battle was not going to be with guns, but with ink and paper, and the stakes were higher than ever. The air was heavy with tension as Elara, with Caleb and a determined Silas at her side, rode into redemption one last time, the Homestead Act certificate carefully folded and tucked into her satchel. They went directly to the town hall, a place that had previously offered them no help. The town clerk, seeing Elara's determined expression and the support she now had, nervously agreed to review the document. As he read the faded ink, his eyes widened with recognition. The certificate was legitimate, its seals and signatures perfectly preserved. Just as the clerk was stamping the document, a furious Silas Blackwood stormed in, his face a mask of pure, unbridled rage. He had heard rumors of what they had found, and he was livid. "That document is a fraud," he roared, pointing a shaking finger at Elara. "This land is mine. She's nothing but a scheming woman." But Elara stood firm. She presented the document to the sheriff, who now looked at her with a new, profound respect. The sheriff, a man of the law, read the official seals and signatures. His face, once weary, hardened into a look of finality. The law was clear. Blackwood's claims were invalid, and the Lazy J was legally Elara's. With the legal battle won, Elara's victory resonated throughout the valley. The townsfolk, seeing the tyrant humbled by a widow's courage, finally broke free from their fear. They rallied around her, not just with words, but with action. The owner of the general store offered her credit for supplies. The blacksmith promised to repair her equipment for free. They were not just helping a neighbor. They were reclaiming their own dignity. The Lazy J was not only safe, but revitalized. In the end, Elara didn't just save a ranch. She saved a community from a bully's oppression. The final scene shows Elara, Caleb, and the townsfolk working together under the vast western sky, honoring Jed's memory not with grief, but with a promise kept and a future built on courage and community. The promise she made on a deathbed had been fulfilled, and the land would forever be hers. What an amazing and emotional journey. This story is just a small taste of the incredible tales we create. If you loved following Elara's fight for her land, you're in for a treat with our other videos. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more stories of courage, resilience, and the human spirit.